Mbeki pushed for the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, an economic plan that promised African-led development in exchange for improved governance. While Gaddafi threw money at problems, Mbeki negotiated structures and institutions. Together, these two very different leaders would shape the African Union, one providing resources and revolutionary energy, the other providing legitimacy and diplomatic skill. Not all key players were individuals, some were groups. The frontline states, nations like Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Botswana had fought together against colonialism and apartheid. They had experience cooperating across borders for liberation. They understood that Africa's problems required African solutions. Leaders like Tanzania's Julius Nyerere had been champions of Pan-Africanism since the 1960s. Though Nyerere had retired by 2002, his influence lived on. He had proven that African unity wasn't just theoretical, it could be practical, especially in the face of common enemies. But not everyone believed in the African Union dream. Some leaders saw it as a threat to their power. Others saw it as an expensive distraction from real problems. Nations like Nigeria and Egypt, giants of African politics, worried about losing influence in a united structure. Smaller nations feared being dominated by larger, wealthier neighbors. Outside Africa, Western powers watched nervously. A truly united Africa could challenge the post-colonial economic order. It could control its own resources, set its own terms, resist external manipulation. France, Britain, and the United States had spent decades maintaining influence through bilateral relationships with individual African nations. A strong African Union could change everything. The formation of the AU wasn't just an internal African affair. It was geopolitics, a power struggle over who would control Africa's future. To understand why the African Union was necessary, we must understand why the OAU failed. The Organization of African Unity began with high hopes. Its charter promised solidarity and coordination, but almost immediately cracks appeared. In 1967, the Biafran War erupted in Nigeria. The southeastern region attempted to secede, leading to a brutal 3-year conflict that killed over 1 million people, mostly through starvation. The OAU did nothing. Its principle of non-interference meant it couldn't take sides, couldn't intervene, couldn't save lives. In Uganda, Idi Amin launched one of Africa's most brutal dictatorships in the 1970s. He killed an estimated 300,000 people. The OAU remained silent. Why? Because Amin was a head of state, and the OAU protected heads of state, no matter their crimes. In 1994, Rwanda descended into genocide. In just 100 days, approximately 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were slaughtered. The OAU issued statements but took no action. It had no mechanisms for intervention, no peacekeeping forces, no authority to stop member states from committing atrocities. Again and again, the pattern repeated. Crisis emerges, OAU discusses, nothing happens. Critics called it the dictators' club. Leaders who committed human rights abuses in their own countries were welcomed at OAU summits. The organization seemed more interested in protecting sovereignty than protecting people. But the 1990s brought transformation. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. The artificial divisions that had defined African politics for decades, capitalist versus communist, East versus West, suddenly meant nothing. At the same time, a new generation of African leaders emerged. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, who brought moral authority. Leaders like Uganda's Yoweri Museveni and Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi, who talked about self-reliance and good governance. They looked at the OAU and saw failure. They asked hard questions. Why can't we stop wars? Why can't we promote democracy? Why are we still so dependent on foreign aid and foreign intervention? In 1999, the OAU finally acknowledged its own inadequacy. At the Algiers summit, African leaders admitted that the organization needed fundamental reform. The world was changing. Africa needed to change with it. Enter Muammar Gaddafi. In September 1999, Gaddafi hosted an extraordinary OAU summit in Sirte, Libya. This wasn't a regular meeting, it was a call to revolution. Gaddafi made his case. The OAU is broken, it has failed to prevent conflicts, failed to promote development, failed to give Africa a voice in global affairs. He proposed something radical: dissolve the OAU and create a new organization, a United States of Africa with supranational powers, a continental government, a single military, one economic union. The proposal shocked many leaders. It was Nkrumah's dream reborn, but 40 years later, and from a controversial messenger. Some leaders were enthusiastic, others were horrified, but everyone agreed on one thing: the status quo wasn't working. The Sirte Declaration was adopted. It called for the establishment of an African Union, but the details were left vague. What powers would it have? How would it be structured? Would it respect sovereignty or override it? The debate had begun. Between 1999 and 2001, African diplomats worked to hammer out the details. Two visions competed: Gaddafi's vision, strong central authority; immediate political integration, United States of Africa; Mbeki and others' vision, gradual integration, focus on economic development, respect for sovereignty with limited exceptions. The negotiations were intense. Smaller nations feared domination. Larger nations feared losing control. Some leaders genuinely believed in unity. Others saw it as a way to maintain their own power with a new institutional shield. Compromises were made. The African Union would be stronger than the OAU. It would have the right to intervene in grave circumstances like genocide, but it wouldn't be a superstate. Nations would retain sovereignty. It would promote economic integration through the African Economic Community, but it wouldn't force political union. It would have a Peace and Security Council to address conflicts, but interventions would require consensus. In July 2000, in Lomé, Togo, the Constitutive Act of the African Union was adopted. 49 countries signed it. 1 year later, after 2/3 had ratified it, it entered into force. The African Union was real. July 9th, 2002, Durban, South Africa. The world watched as the Organization of African Unity held its final summit. That evening, it would officially dissolve. In its place, the African Union would be born. The symbolism was powerful. South Africa, once the continent's shame, the last bastion of white minority rule, was now its shining hope. Nelson Mandela, though retired, attended. Thabo Mbeki, as host, welcomed leaders from across the continent. 53 nations were represented, from tiny island nations like Seychelles to continental giants like Nigeria and Egypt, from democracies to dictatorships, from the wealthiest to the poorest. At midnight, the OAU banner was lowered. The AU flag, green with a golden map of Africa surrounded by stars, was raised. Speeches were made. Gaddafi called it Africa's moment. Mbeki spoke of renaissance and renewal. Alpha Oumar Konaré of Mali became the AU's first chairperson. But beneath the celebration, questions lingered. Would this new organization be different? Could Africa truly unite? Or was this just the OAU with a new name? The African Union was immediately tested. In 2003, conflict erupted in Darfur, Sudan. The Sudanese government launched a campaign of violence against African ethnic groups. Hundreds of thousands died. The AU faced its first major crisis. Unlike the OAU, the AU acted. It deployed the African Union mission in Sudan amidst 7,000 peacekeepers sent to protect civilians. For the first time, African soldiers were intervening in an African conflict under African command. But IMF struggled. Underfunded, under-equipped, and understaffed, the mission couldn't stop the violence. Eventually, the United Nations took over. The Darfur intervention showed both the AU's ambition and its limitations. It wanted to solve African problems with African solutions, but without sufficient resources, political will, or military capacity, it couldn't. Other challenges emerged. Burundi descended into civil war. The AU deployed peacekeepers, again underfunded and overwhelmed. Togo experienced a constitutional crisis. The AU suspended Togo until democratic order was restored, a move the OAU never would have made. Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe presided over economic collapse and political violence. The AU issued statements but took no real action, revealing that old habits died hard. While peacekeeping grabbed headlines, the real work of the AU happened in meeting rooms and policy documents. The African Union wasn't just one institution, it was a system. The assembly of heads of state and government, the supreme decision-making body, the Executive Council of Foreign Ministers implementing decisions, the Pan-African Parliament representing Africa's people, though with limited powers, the Peace and Security Council responsible for conflict prevention and intervention, the African Court on Human and People's Rights enforcing human rights standards, the African Union Commission, the administrative bureaucracy running day-to-day operations, regional economic communities building blocks for continental integration. Each institution faced challenges. The Pan-African Parliament struggled with legitimacy because most members were appointed, not elected. The Peace and Security Council lacked funding for its ambitious mandate. The Commission in Addis Ababa was plagued by bureaucracy and inefficiency, but slowly structures took shape. Protocols were signed, norms were established. The African Union began developing its own identity, separate from the Organization of African Unity's legacy. One of the AU's most ambitious goals was economic integration. Africa in 2002 was economically fragmented. 53 currencies, 53 sets of trade regulations, 53 different customs systems. Moving goods across African borders was often harder than shipping them to Europe. The AU inherited the African Economic Community Framework from the OAU, which envisioned 6 stages of integration culminating in a single African common market by 2028.